It's time to journey through sci-fi.
Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi with me, Matt.
And me, James.
And this week we're on episode 1 of our artificial intelligence series, and we are discussing the world of the future. What films are we looking at today, James?
So this week we're going to be looking at Metropolis by Fritz Lang, and we're also going to be taking a look at Blade Runner.
I love that one. I can't wait to talk about these.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So yeah, we're going to be taking a look at how artificial intelligence is treated in both of these films, having a little chat about the way the future is depicted in both of these as well.
And the interesting cityscapes that both of them create. That's why we paired these two up together, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Cool. Did you tell me you watched Metropolis at work?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Well, yeah, so basically I'd managed to mess up one of the hard drives. Well, I say mess up, I didn't really. Basically, I had loads of footage from what I'd been shooting on that day, and I tried to transfer it from a G drive onto a Lacy.
Okay.
And so I did the usual, like, you get the files, you drag and drop, and it's going to copy them, right?
Classic.
Yeah. It didn't copy them. It removed them from the G drive.
What?
And then put them onto the Lacy. And it took 3 hours to do that. I was like, 3 hours, brilliant, be done by 6, lovely,
Okay.
go home.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it just took all of them off the G drive onto the Lacy, so I had to recopy them over again.
Oh, you moved the files.
Yeah, I'd moved
Right,
the files.
okay.
It was really weird.
Huh.
I have no idea why I did
So it
it.
took 3 hours to do that, and then you had to copy them back to the G drive for
Yeah.
another 3 hours.
Yeah. So I was in work till 9. So,
Oh my God, man.
so I was like, yeah, I'll just watch Metropolis now.
Watch it twice.
But yeah, that was fun. It made the whole viewing experience quite different. Because I was watching it just on my laptop at work.
Right.
And just sort of in between that, checking the other laptop to see that it was transferring the files. Yeah.
That sounds just so mind-numbing, just being stuck somewhere. And you weren't even doing anything.
Nah.
Like, you just had to wait for it to
Yeah,
happen.
just had to wait. But one of the interesting things is, so when I was watching Metropolis, obviously I was in the office with the fluorescent lighting and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There was one thing I picked out in the film, which I don't think I would have if I'd watched it at home. So there's this. So in the very first bit, when they're sort of going down in the lift,
Yeah.
all the workers and they're moving sort of like in unison and that kind of thing. It goes down into the worker city, and it's got sort of like big square or rectangular lights
Okay.
on top of the cavern, and they looked exactly like the lights I had in my office. So I was like, have offices just been built to look like
Yeah.
the workers' city? And yeah, it made the rest of the evening quite dark for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I found when I first put it on, that first bit. A horribly relatable kind of feeling of those lines of downtrodden men looking at their feet, marching in unison to their miserable 10-hour shift at the factory. You know, it was like trains pulling into Charing Cross Station. You know, it was unfortunately quite a relatable feeling for a 100-odd or nearly 100-year-old film, to kind of capture that feeling of the commute as
That's
it feels even today.
I never really thought about that. But yeah, thinking about it, like definitely on my commute, I've seen people walking in that sort of like unison manner off to work, off to the offices.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mad. See, Fritz Lang was just predicting it all there.
But I think that's what genuinely has contributed to that film being kind of sticking around in the consciousness for such a long time, because I guess, I don't know, when was the last time you watched Metropolis?
I think it must have been. Did we watch it at uni?
We definitely watched it at uni, and I wouldn't be surprised if I fell asleep in the screening room.
Yeah.
One thing I took away from watching it now is, I guess, like, I've matured a bit, because it's 2.5 hours long, and I was kind of dreading sitting down to watch that.
Yeah,
But
same here.
it went by an awful lot quicker than I thought it would. I wasn't really bored at any points, and I was kind of engaged with it the whole time, which wasn't even true when I was a full-time film student, and I should have been, paying a lot of attention. So yeah, that kind of took me by surprise. I still really like it, and I liked it when I was younger. but I found it's quite on the nose with the politics of it. You know, it's quite simplistic. It's very...
But then it was 1927, wasn't it?
Yeah, sure.
So it's the first time, it was like the first full-length science fiction film, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think what I was feeling watching it was that some of the visuals, most of the visuals are still like so amazing, so great to see. I'm a big appreciator of when you can see the work that's gone into a movie, without kind of like detracting or taking you out of the moment, but seeing just how complicated something is. You know, when you see those wide shots of the city and the cars are kind of moving and you can see it's like a tiny little model car, but there's also like 6 things going on at once that have all been composited
it's amazing.
together.
I don't know how they managed to do that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was reading online is the amount of extras which are in that film. I think it's something like 37,000 or something ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah, how could you like organize that many people on a film set?
Yeah.
And,
I had no idea it was that many, but you certainly get a sense of it, especially at the end, you know, when the city's flooding and there's like 100 children on screen, and they're all acting, you know, they're like reaching out, they look panicked as you would in that sort of situation. It's just like, there's so many people on screen. You see we were just talking about the workers. There's a couple of 100 people on screen at a time.
Easily, yeah.
You don't really get that anymore. You just CGI them in, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's the thing I was thinking as well. And because there's no CGI and it's just the very early workings of sort of visual effects and stuff, that makes it even more impressive. Exactly like all the stuff that Fritz Lang managed to do with the film.
And that's what I love. That sense of, you just get a sense of the work that's gone into it. That adds to the visually impressive nature of it. There are special effects and those are impressive, but also just the work that goes into operating a crowd that large and making a film out of it. It's really amazing to see.
So let's try and summarize the plot for Metropolis. How would you go about summarizing that film?
Metropolis is a film about a working class and an upper class. The working class work in a factory down below, underground, a giant. I get the impression the factory is the size of a city.
Yeah.
That they go into, the owners of the factory and their sons. I think it explicitly refers to them as their sons. There's no daughters up in there. They live on a beautiful utopian heaven-like structure up in the sky above the workers' city, blissfully ignorant of the suffering of the workers below, until Freda, Joe Fredeson's son. Joe Fredesen is the...
I was thinking about this as well, so I don't know if my pronunciation is going to be exactly right for a lot of these names.
Yeah, so I took it as Joe, the J-O-H, Joe Fredesen.
Joe Fredesen, yeah.
I think it's Freda, that sounds
Frida?
German.
Fredesen?
Frida.
I mean, it probably doesn't matter at this
I don't think it matters. Did you imagine... When you watch a film like that, do you imagine they're speaking English? Because you see them speaking to each other and sometimes you'll get like the intertitle that gives a bit of dialogue. Do you just imagine them speaking English in your head, even though you know they're speaking German 100 years ago?
I know there was a few bits where I was watching their mouths and being like, oh yeah, I can kind of see what they're saying. And then afterwards I was like, I definitely didn't understand it because they were speaking in German.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So the rich folk and their sons, the factory owners, they live up above the workers' city and they're all blissfully ignorant of the suffering below until one day the son of the ruler of Metropolis, Joe Fredesen, his son Freda, it's never said in the film, but I assume his name is Freda Fredesen.
Yep, brilliant name.
He is visited by a woman from down below who brings a load of urchins up to him and she's showing them this beautiful world on top and encouraging them to go up there. And this makes Freda want to visit the down below. And then the rest of the film is kind of his odyssey through that, right?
Him discovering exactly what's going on with the workers and figuring out sort of what he can do to help them.
Sure. And while all this is going on, there's a crazy inventor, of course.
Oh, yes.
Who has built...
Rotvang or Rotwang.
Rotvang, yeah. Who has built what he calls a machine man, which is definitely a machine woman.
Yeah. As soon as you see that robot, it's moving with like all the hips, all the hip movements, and like obviously it's got very pronounced breasts.
Yeah.
You know that it's a woman. It's a machine woman.
Yeah. But we constantly refer to it as the machine man.
The machine man.
Which is never really addressed, I don't think, unless we're missing something there. He's built that. He thinks he's 24 hours away from this stainless steel robot looking exactly like a human.
And he says, doesn't he say like in 24 hours, no one will be able to know which is which?
Which on first impression, you're a bit like, come on, mate.
I mean, look at it. You know it's a robot.
But it comes to pass that he is absolutely right, because he is ordered by Joe Fredersen to give the machine man woman the likeness of Maria, who is the woman who's inciting the workers to kind of, well, not rise up really, but she's giving them a sense of she's preaching a sort of messianic message, isn't she? She's suggesting that a mediator is going to come who will bridge the gap between the upstairs and the downstairs, between the
brain and the heart. It's that, isn't it? So because the whole film is about trying to find like common ground.
Yeah, which is actually one of the more complex bits of the politics of it, because I guess on first glance it might seem like quite a communist film. It's about workers rising up, but really the message is actually saying, no, it's okay to have some filthy rich people on top using these people below, as long as they can reach a compromise and work together.
So this is an interesting thing as well, because Fritz Lang was approached by Goebbels to do all of the Nazi propaganda films. And I know from what I've read, Hitler was very sort of like, Fritz Lang is the guy. We want him to do all these films for the Nazi party. But Fritz Lang was like, this is not my message. I'm not on board with this. So he had like numerous meetings with Goebbels at the propaganda offices. And and in the end, he had to flee to America to sort of like get out of having to work with the Nazis.
Wow. Was this before or after he made Metropolis?
I think it was after he'd made Metropolis, because they'd seen...
So that kind of put him on their radar.
Because Hitler had seen Metropolis, and the whole Nazi thing was they wanted people to work to be free. And working was sort of their way of being free.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at the film from Fritz Lang's perspective, it's not so much about that. It's about sort of like, I'm trying to think of the right words to describe it. It's the workers are a means to an end, and it shouldn't be like that, is more what Fritz Lang's saying.
Mm.
Yeah.
He's about empowering the workers, I think.
Yeah.
And like we said, finding that common ground, the mediator's the thing that he's pushing for in that movie.
Yeah, because it's more of a communist sort of Marxist message, isn't it, in that film, as opposed to anything sort of Nazi-based.
Mm. That's really interesting as well. I know from, going back to my history classes at school that a really important thing for the Nazi Party was the impact of the messaging. They were all about the propaganda, weren't they? And the powerful messages. And it's what made Hitler so successful, is that he was a powerful speaker. He spoke loudly. But I can see how a propaganda machine like that would be interested in a filmmaker like Fritz Lang off the back of Metropolis, because it bombards you with the visuals. I can see how that would be an incredibly powerful political tool if you were in the market to manipulate that. Yeah,
but also Fritz Lang wasn't like fully Aryan either.
Right.
And that was one of the things that he pointed out to Goebbels, apparently. He was like, well, I'm not like Aryan. I'm not sure if I can be part of this sort of regime. And Goebbels said, we decide who's Aryan.
Yeah.
It was one of those ones.
A bit rotten. I think that, the Nazis were a bit rotten. I don't think that's a controversial opinion, to be honest.
No. So this film has had numerous different cuts. And I know. So did you watch the same version as I did, didn't you?
Yeah, the 2010 restoration release.
Yeah, I think
it was found in Buenos Aires.
That's it. Because it says it at the beginning of it. So they found a damaged print in 2008.
Yeah.
With Lang's original cut of the film. So they found. Was it in Argentina?
They found it in Argentina, the main bit, and then I think it was saying in the introduction that they also restored it with another print that was found in New Zealand.
Yeah. So they
filled some gaps.
So they managed to restore it to sort of 95% of what Fritz Lang would have wanted.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing achievement.
I don't know. It's crazy.
I don't know what state it was in. I haven't seen a version from before 2007, so I don't know how much was cut out and how different that story would be.
So when it first premiered, it had a runtime of 120 minutes, and it was deemed a little bit too long and complicated at the time. So then they did another cut for America, which was 1 hour and 55 minutes. So like
They cut 5 minutes out.
Cut 5 minutes, made all the difference. And then in April of that year, they removed all the communist and religious imagery.
Okay.
And then in 1936, it got cut down again to 91 minutes.
Tight 91 minutes. I respect that. I like a 90-minute movie.
So it's been cut so many times, and when it first came out, it didn't get very good reviews at all. I know H.G. Wells very famously said it was a bit silly. So it's kind of like you've got to think about what bits people were missing when they first saw that film and how much of an impact that had.
I can see how it might get a review like that, though, in terms of, I haven't read a lot of H.G. Wells, but for a writer like that who is so focused on the story and the narrative, and like I said, I don't think it is the most complex narrative. It's a film that really rides on its visuals, and it's you're bombarded with this amazing cityscape and the factories and the caverns. It's like really a really just rewarding thing to watch for your senses, but I don't know if it's really like tickling your brain too much, you know?
But like all of that sort of like it shows how important that film was, because those cityscapes and things we were talking about, they've gone on to be used in films again and again, and they're sort of like the blueprint to a lot of sci-fi films now, and sort of the way they depict these futuristic cities.
What kinds of things did you see in it that you recognised from later films?
Well, obviously, as we're going to talk about in a little while, Blade Runner.
Yeah.
It's got so many scenes where the new Tower of Babel looks exactly like the Tyrell building.
It does, yeah.
So they've got lots of different comparisons there, and there's bits of Fifth Element in there, and pretty much any futuristic city you can think of.
Do you know the one thing that stuck in my head more than anything else? You're a Final Fantasy fan, aren't you?
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VII, Nibelheim, the Mako reactor,
Yeah.
is literally must be based on the machine that blows up early on
heart
in the
machine.
film. Yeah. It's the kind of central staircase and 2 rows of pods.
Yeah. I
and
didn't
that's
think about
almost
that.
identical to where Jehovah is born.
Yeah. That's mad.
Genova.
Genova.
Where Genova is born in Final Fantasy VII.
And also Rotvang's house.
Very reminiscent of, is it Aerith's house in Midgar? Yep. Yeah, definitely clocked that as well. And there's a spiraling staircase that goes into like a downstairs area that looks just like the mansion I think in Nibelheim. I think a lot of Midgar in Final Fantasy VII is borrowing a lot from Metropolis.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that stuck in my mind the most as a 30-year-old man who played a lot of Final Fantasy VII.
I'm with you on
ago.
that one, definitely. Yeah. And also like, so if you look at the robot Maria, the machine man.
Absolutely iconic robot.
Yeah, that is C-3PO.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's C-3PO there, and Rotvang's hand is just like Luke's hand
very much
in
like
Star Wars later on. So it's all these films are borrowing from Metropolis's early sort of bits they put in there.
Yeah. Love that hand, that kind of gloved hand. And he says, is it worth losing a hand to create this? And I thought, well, yeah, because like whatever you've replaced your hand with there, it looks fine.
It's pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah,
you've done
you
well.
haven't lost a lot there, Rob.
So one of the interesting things I know that they cut from the sort of earlier versions that they show to audiences is they cut all of the stuff about hell. So Rotvang, his the reason he builds the machine man in the first place is because he's trying to bring Hell back to life.
Yeah.
Hell, who is Joe Friederson's wife, who has died, and also Frieda's mother.
Now, what did you take Hell's relationship to Rotvang to be?
I think it was like a romantic relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if Joe Friederson and Rotvang were love rivals, because the film explicitly refers to them as rivals later on, not love rivals, but rivals. So I wasn't sure if they were love rivals or if Hell had been Rotvang's daughter. Just by the ages of the guys, I wasn't quite sure about that.
It skims over that whole fact. But yeah, I am automatically imagined it to be a romantic relationship just because that would bring the reasoning as to why he's creating this machine man to bring back Hell.
Yeah.
Because I think the desire not the desire to do that wouldn't be any more strong if it was his daughter, but I felt like, and that kind of like is more of why they've got this rivalry.
No, I think you're right. I think it's a love rivalry.
Yeah.
because Freda would be Rotfang's grandson.
Yeah.
If that were the case, and he'd probably feel quite differently to Freda in that.
That's it. And
fair enough.
Rotfang's trying to dismantle the city and do all these things to destroy it.
Yeah.
And destroy Frida and everything. So it kind of brings that more to the forefront if it is because of the romantic rivalry stuff.
So Rotfang's trying to build himself a robot girlfriend, essentially. That's his original motivation when we meet that
that's what it
character.
seems like, yeah.
Yeah. So they cut the stuff about hell. Why did they do that?
I think it was anything sort of biblical and stuff like that. They cut through all those bits and pieces because also hell is kind of like the Norse goddess. So the Norse goddess was one who looked after hell, and hell means hidden in Norse speak.
Is that where we get our English word hell?
Yeah, I think that's where it came from.
That's very interesting. And there's lots of diverse kind of religious influences on the film, isn't there? Like Moloch becomes the machine, or the machine becomes Moloch and starts eating all the people as the machine is being destroyed.
And Moloch is a god in sort of biblical writings and stuff. And that whole scene when the machine becomes Moloch and that they suddenly become slaves rather than workers, and they're all sort of like being pulled up into this fire pit to be served up to the machine as an offering. And then afterwards you see these workers moving in unison again, as they always do in that robotic manner, and just following them up. But they're not struggling like the slaves were. They're just sort of like quite happy to be going up and being served up. They're
dejectedly willing to go up there and give themselves over to the machine. Yeah, it's very miserable kind of imagery, isn't it? They use the image of slaves, the workers as slaves, quite a lot. There's a lot of pyramid imagery in this film, and we see it a bit in Blade Runner as well, which is very evocative of slavery, structures that are built off the back of slaves. People, the shape of the pyramid obviously lends itself to sort of hierarchical structure, as well as being really evocative of slave-built structures and people who've made a success of themselves off the back of others. I think they introduce where the factory owners live with a pyramid-shaped scrolling text as well, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and they've got there's lots of sort of pyramid shapes in there. So when you first see the machine Maria, and she's dressed up like the Whore of Babylon, there's very much a triangle that you can see with her on top of the sort of 7 statues, which have become the 7 deadly sins. And then you've got the upper class people all trying to grab her, and that's sort of that pyramid again.
I love that scene. Is that in the intermezzo scene?
The intermezzo scene, yeah.
So we were talking before off mic, weren't we, about how we both made a note as we were watching it that we get a message saying end of the prelude about an hour into the film. It is a long movie, isn't it?
Because I checked the running time after that. I was
Same.
like, oh God, how long have I
really
watched?
thought I'd just been sitting there for like 15 minutes or something. I was going to find out. But no, the film rattles on at a pretty good pace. And I do love that bit in the middle, the intermezzo, whatever they call it, which is all about, it's kind of a fever dream, isn't it? The whole thing. It's she's dancing in the club. Frida's having a bit of a nightmare about it. What's he done? He's bonked his head or something. He's up in his bed getting bed rest, and he's also having a nightmare about it all happening. And she's turning into, like you said, that Whore of Babylon that's been introduced with a text on screen.
And then before that, I think doesn't Maria talk about the Tower of Babel, and they go into all that sort of reference.
Is that in the intermezzo as well? She narrates the entire story.
Yeah,
of the
I think that's
Tower
kind
of
of like, because it starts in the crypt.
Yeah.
And then she's sort of talking to all the workers, and then they go through that Tower of Babel story, and they've got all the sort of like parallels between what happened in that story and what's actually going on in Metropolis itself.
Yeah. Amazing they cut out all of this religious stuff. It's such a, it's about 40% of the movie, isn't
That's
it?
it. So hence why you get a running time of 91 minutes by the time they've cut all of that out.
Yeah.
But then obviously it makes it a lot more nonsensical again, because you've got all of that stuff's taken out. A lot of the reason characters are doing stuff is taken out.
Yeah, if you take out the religion and the Marxism, you're not left with much storyline in that film.
Yeah. And the whole thing when Frida's taking the role of the worker. I forget what the worker's called.
He's called Georgie 11811.
That's
I think.
it.
Yeah.
Something like that. Some sort of number.
Yeah.
So yeah, when he sort of like takes his place, there's no sort of like reasoning behind that initially.
Yeah.
And then you've got the character of the thin man coming after them, and all sort of like the looking over the newspaper and little bits like that. Sort of all of that wasn't in the cuts, which people have seen before.
Right. The Thin Man is a wonderfully cast, just the type of guy you don't see anymore in movies. He's absolutely fantastic.
He's so creepy.
Yeah.
Just leering in the background all the time. So going back to Rotvang, obviously when you see his laboratory, that is the iconic laboratory which we later could see in all the sort of Frankenstein films from Universal later on.
Yeah.
And again, like we were talking about all the Final Fantasy VII things that we noticed, obviously the Frankenstein bit, the whole...
He's very much a Frankenstein character, isn't he? He's a mad scientist who's playing at God to create this fantastical super being that he wants to build. He's building it mechanically as opposed to stitching together dead body parts and working the black magic that Frankenstein works on it. He is a very similar type of character, though, isn't he? He doesn't... he's a very similar type of character.
Yeah. And then did you notice his little sort of sidekick who comes in initially? Who's basically Igor.
Oh, yeah. He has
very briefly.
Yeah. Who's only in one scene, I think. Just pops up, gives him a message, and then goes back down the spiral staircase.
And then you never see or hear him again. Yeah. It's like, all these little bits, which are just... They're in so many different films now. They're in all these Frankenstein films.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that... Because like we were talking before, Frankenstein is considered to be the first sort of birth of science fiction in many ways. And the fact that Fritz Lang has chosen to use that in Metropolis it's quite a direct way, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see how that would have already been a major influence on sci-fi writing and sci-fi concepts, that it was probably, I would say, well woven into the public consciousness, as we talked about last time, about how certain concepts in sci-fi can become just part of the public consciousness, and you can easily step into that mode when you're watching a sci-fi film. It just shows us how old that Frankenstein, that mad scientist trope was, even well established in 1927.
Yeah, definitely.
So in this future world of Metropolis, machinery is very much seen as the villain of the film, isn't it? I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
What I was surprised to find quite relatable again is you were talking before about the worker that he replaces. And the worker's job seems to be moving hands on a big clock-like thing. So they line up with lights randomly popping up and doing that for 10 hours. I remember watching that when I was younger and thinking that was quite silly and quite a strange sight. But I think it is it's relatable to see something that's like seemingly pointless that you have to do for a long time for your job. I think that works on any level. It would have been very relatable in 1927 to anybody who worked in like an industrial job at that time would have felt a very similar thing, probably about the machinery they're operating. Anyone who maybe sits in front of spreadsheets for 8 hours a day might feel similarly. What does the worker say? He says, oh no, when Freder's taken his role, he says, will 10 hours never end?
Yeah. And something about that 10 hours as well, because they're trying to squeeze an extra working day into the week by making all of the working hours, it's 10 hours a working day.
Really?
So they try it so they can squeeze out another day.
Right.
Out of the 5 days.
Yeah.
Which is, horrendous.
A very relatable feeling. I love that 10-hour clock. It reminded me of, the episode of The Simpsons where the smart people in town take over and they introduce metric time.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that one.
It's so Lisa joins. It's not. I don't think they call it Mensa, but she joins like this group of clever people in town. So it's like Skinner, comic book guy, the lawyer lady. Yeah. And they all take over and they introduce metric time. And Skinner's like standing next to a metric clock that goes up to 10, and he's like, "Remember this day, 10 to something, 60 past 10 on." So yeah, I love that.
So I think one of the interesting things they've got in this film is the workers, again, a sort of lack of humanity that the workers seem to have when they're doing their job.
Yeah.
And they're all treated as sort of cogs in the machine.
Yeah.
They're all moving in that mechanical way, which we talked about. That obviously that great scene in front of the heart machine where they're all moving in unison, and it isn't until that meter starts to go up, and the only emotion you see in that scene is obviously coming from Frida, who's looking on and is just like, what the hell is going on? Why are these people just doing this? And there's the guy who's looking after the meter. And then as it goes up, you can see the panic in his face. And then all these workers are working sort of as and when, just still in that mechanical movement. And then all of a sudden it starts blowing up. And then you see the humanity in them because they're reacting in all these sort of like painful ways, getting all the steam in their faces. And it's interesting that because you don't see much of the human side of a lot of the characters, like in terms of the workers and
even at the end, they are a mostly faceless mob, aren't they? They're not, you don't see a lot of humanity in them. They're just sort of storming the gates as a mob. Yeah,
that's it. And it's that thing about being robotic and not having humanity in that, and is that sort of where things are going wrong in this society that Fritz Lang's depicting.
Yeah, and we can come back to that when we talk about Blade Runner as well. The idea that the humans lacking emotions and the importance of the emotions is a theme that pops up a lot when we're talking about artificial intelligence and sci-fi
definitely.
in general.
So how do you feel about the artificial intelligence being depicted in this? Because I feel more that it's the workers which seem more mechanical in a lot of ways throughout the film.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I don't think the main AI in this, the robot, the machine man, it doesn't have a lot of its own agency, does it? It's set on a mission by Rotvang and, to a lesser extent, Joe Fredersen. I don't think we see much of what robot Maria is actually trying to get from things and what her intentions are. She's just set loose as a bit of a runaway agent, given a very specific mission by Rotvang to incite rebellion in the workers.
It's like the machines are all depicted as being evil basically in this, because the workers are slaves to the machines, and then Maria is trying to disrupt the workers and the other society of the sort of like upper class people.
So would this have been a comment at the time on industrialization and the effects that had probably, going up on about 100 years at that point when this film came out, the Industrial Revolution would have been having its effects on society? Is that do you think that's the kind of commentary they were going for?
I think it must have been. And the whole sort of, the idea of not becoming a slave to the machine, I think that's something which comes out in so many AI films afterwards, is something like Her, where you've got people finding relationships through these machines and different things like that. They become a slave to it in some ways. And and again, if you look at people just on their mobile phones all the time, you become a slave to technology. And this film is one of the first ones where they introduce that as a theme, not becoming a slave to these sort of like machines and different technological advances that come up.
And machinery as a tool of oppression as well in this film, certainly. And I guess it's played a bit, you're not quite sure do you think Joe Fredersen knows that he's using the machinery in the factories to oppress those people? I think early on in the film, he seems like he might be a bit naive to it and blind, but then later on we see him spying on them and he's actually quite duplicitous and he's manipulating things.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about that, because obviously when you first see him, he's sort of like, oh, Josephat, why have you not told me about this? I should know about all these things that are going on with the workers.
Exactly.
But then later on, when he's with Rotvang, he changes his tune.
Yeah, he's shown to be quite manipulative, and he wants to. So his intention is to use the robot Maria to calm the workers down and stop them from revolting.
Yeah, whereas in the end, the robot Maria gets used to enthrall all of the upper class guys up at the top.
And at the same time, she's causing a rebellion down below, isn't she? Keeping the rich folk distracted while she incites rebellion that almost destroys the entire city.
Yeah, so Rotvang is kind of like, he wants the whole sort of Armageddon to happen and the destruction of these cities by playing them off against each other almost.
Yeah, he's a bit of an anarchist in there, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, he's mad, isn't he?
He's mad and he's driven by passion and rage and jealousy, but he's playing that kind of anarchical agent.
Speaking of that, what did you think about the scene in the crypt when he's taking Maria? So there's like this flashing light that keeps popping up, and you just loads of close-ups of Maria's face as Rotfang's coming after her.
Right.
It's a really intense moment.
Is this when it's like, close-ups of both of their faces as he's like edging towards her? Yeah.
And he's sort of like creeping up and then grabs her. And I found that really disturbing.
The crypts were great. The crypts are very gothic and they're not quite that full-on expressionism that was kind of going on roughly the same time or a little bit earlier in German cinema. But it definitely it had that kind of feel to it. I love the Seven Sins statues. They are terrifying. They're so weird. And then when they come to life later and they're moving around, they reminded me of the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who. They've got that horrible moving stone creepiness to them.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting them to move as well.
No, me neither. I forgot that.
As soon as it's the Grim Reaper one in the middle, as soon as that guy starts moving around, it's like, what's going on?
That's in the intermezzo, isn't it? That's why I love that middle bit, because it's the weirdest bit of the film.
Yeah.
And there's lots of crazy ideas going on there, lots of crazy visuals. We've moved away from the city in that bit, and it's much more horror, folky kind of weirdness to it.
The whole thing is it's lots of gothic sort of symbols and stuff like that, and like the church at the end is very gothic.
Yeah, and it's a nice contrast between the old gothic and the new futuristic scenes of the city.
Yes, that merging of the two. One of the other things about the crypt I thought as well, like we're talking about film comparisons. Have you seen Battle for the Planet of the Apes?
I don't think so.
It's one of the older ones,
right.
And they've got, I think this is the right one. There's like an underground civilization.
Of apes?
Well, no, these are the humans which have survived.
Right.
And I swear those cabins look exactly the same as the ones sort of shown in that film. And again, there's so many films that borrow little elements and you think, oh, I recognise this.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, it's in this film as well and in this one.
It's such an influential movie. It's such a... it sets the tone for sci-fi for like the next century, doesn't it?
Yeah, do you remember the video phone bit in Metropolis?
Who's calling?
So I think it's Joe Friederson. And he's just talking to, is it Grot?
Oh, the operator of the heart machine. Yeah.
So I found that, I wasn't expecting it. And it's properly like a video call.
Yeah.
And then if you go back to 2001 has all those video calls in.
Yeah.
And sort of like harking back to Metropolis. Again, another influence which has come out.
It's pretty amazing that it took technology such a long time to get there, but we are now there, aren't we, with video calling?
Yeah.
And again, we talked about this a little bit last time, didn't we, about how these films do inspire people to create technology that they see in movies. The sliding doors from Star Trek influenced real life sliding doors. Like people see these films, it sparks something in their brain, or it just lays that seed of an interesting thought, and then it just gets brought into the real world through these genius people who sort of grow up around that.
And in 1927, they didn't have like computers or anything like that, yet Fritz Lang is imagining you can just talk to someone on a screen and then they can have a screen and then that's it. That's a call. It's mad.
It makes you wonder what technology we will have in 50 years' time that we're seeing in movies now.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, is Metropolis set in the year 2000 or something like that?
Is it?
I mean, I don't know if that's right.
I know that Janelle Monáe's album series, influenced by Metropolis, is set in like a number anagram of 1927, so it's like 27. Oh, it's 2719.
Oh, nice. I didn't know she'd done that.
Do you not? Oh, no. We've heard The Archandroid, right?
Yeah.
So that was her first main album.
Yeah.
So she's doing a 7-part story based on Metropolis, but it's like it's a whole new story, but heavily influenced by Metropolis.
That's brilliant.
And all of her albums and EPs, apart from the most recent one, are part of that 7-part story. I think she's done 5 of the 7 parts. So she did an EP, that was part 1, and then 2 albums that were part 2 and 3, 4 and 5. Yeah, it's about a robot called Cindy Mayweather, I think, who comes from 2719. She travels back in time and she's trying to like save the android community from this oppressive force that's trying to make love illegal or something like that. It's like Metropolis meets Prince with
Metropolis
Janelle
meets
Monáe's
Prince.
Yeah, Metropolis meets Prince with Janelle Monáe's, whole spin.
I mean,
on
I need
top
to
of
listen
it.
to this album or the whole thing. So 7 different.
It's called 7. She calls them suites.
Mm-hmm.
So the first EP was Suite 1, and then there's 2 albums that have 2 suites each.
Good morning, Cyboys and Cybergirls. I'm happy to announce that we have a star-crossed winner in today's Heartbreak Sweepstakes. Android number 57821, otherwise known as Cindy Mayweather, has fallen desperately in love with a human named Anthony Greendown. And do you know the rules? She is now scheduled for immediate disassembly. Bounty hunters, you can find her.
So this whole thing about the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart. That whole theme is something which comes out again and again in artificial intelligence films.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the first, this must be the film which does that the first time, and talking about the emotions that you're supposed to have and humanity. So how do you feel, how does Metropolis depict that?
So we talked before about the complete lack of humanity in the workers, that they were missing that kind of heart and the importance of that. So that message of the mediator between the head and the hands is kind of reducing all of those workers to hands.
Yeah.
Like they're just this operational function. Whereas the rich people up in the clouds, they are the cerebral brains of the operation.
Or
You've
more
got-
directly, Joe Friederson is supposed to be the head, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
they refer to him as the brain at one point or something like that, I
Yeah.
think in his office. And then you've got Frieda, who is the heart, because every single scene he's in, he's gushing about something. He's always just, emotions all over his face.
Yeah, he's a terribly emotional young man, isn't he?
Yeah. It's like, as soon as he sees Maria, he's like, oh, I'm in love with her. I need to go and find her. Oh, no, these workers. Oh, no, terrible.
He's all passion and
Yeah.
very little logic.
That's it. And
Yeah.
hence why in the conclusion to the film, he's having that fight with Rotvang on top of the church, and all the emotion is coming out of him then when he's sort of literally fighting to sort of save Maria and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and technology itself is seen as a threat if it's not mediated by this intensely human kind of emotional thing.
Yeah, that's it. So you've got to have a mediator, you've got to have emotions connected to it in order for it not to just be cold and running wild.
Yeah.
So I think that's what really comes out in the film. It's getting that humanity in there. So the workers suddenly become human at the end when they realise that their children might have been killed in this flood. Whereas before they've just gone on a rampage, not even thought about all their kids, which are down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they're like, oh God, where's our humanity? We've left all our kids to die.
Yeah.
And they just go and start burning Machine Maria.
Yeah.
And that's a harrowing scene as well.
That's a great scene. She brings a lot to that performance, doesn't she? Especially when she first becomes Robot Maria and she's all facial expressions,
Yeah.
That really kind of turns into that menacing, threatening.
the weird little
woman.
blink thing she does as well.
Very strange.
So strange. And did you find yourself when she was being burnt? I was constantly just like, she's going to turn into the machine now. She's
Yeah,
gonna
I
turn-
thought we were going to do something with melting the skin off or something
Yeah,
like that.
I was just waiting for that.
Yeah.
And then you do get it at the end and they're like, oh my God, it's a machine. But you find yourself waiting for that and you're willing it to. And again, another comparison is Terminator.
Yes.
You get bits like that. Just every time you think of a scene in Metropolis, you can bring it back to another sci-fi film. So did you know the film was actually based on a book as well?
Not until it was announced in the opening credits.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I spoiled as well. So it was written by Thea von Haber. So she was a popular writer in Weimar, Germany at the time, and she jointly wrote it with Lang, who was her husband then,
Oh, okay.
which I found interesting. In fact, it was actually written with the sole purpose of being made into a film, apparently. So with Metropolis, I know a lot of sci-fi is sort of dealing with the what if. It feels a lot more a sort of a what could happen film. And I think it's the same with Blade Runner, which we're going to talk about later. It is very sort of close to what could potentially happen. I mean, it seemed like, especially given the Industrial Revolution stuff at the time, it seemed very much like it could be a possibility.
Yeah, I think that there was definitely a lot in that film that's based on what would have been very realistic depictions of factory working life in the 1920s. So it's definitely a reflection on that and a looking forward. And it's a very negative look at the future that Fritz Lang was sort of foreseeing of all this factory life that was potentially going to go on unbidden to the suffering of the workers in those factories.
Yeah, and it's very much sort of haves and have-nots.
Yeah.
Because even in that introductory bit, you see all of the workers moving in unison and they're going sort of underground into this really claustrophobic sort of tower blocks everywhere, whereas the haves have the city of suns or something like that.
Yeah.
The big Colosseum bit. And the juxtaposition of those two with that Colosseum and the open air, it's all very big and they're all dressed in white.
They've got like a Garden of Eden
Yeah.
playground.
And they're all sort of like just prancing around, having a lovely time, whereas these workers are just having a miserable one.
So Lang's vision of the future was a very bleak one. He wasn't very hopeful for the way things were going. And that's definitely something that comes through in sci-fi a lot. In fact, dystopia is certainly a more common sci-fi trope than utopia. And if we see utopias in film, more often than not, I'd say those utopias are revealed to be not quite as wonderful as they seem.
Yeah, it's always, you see like a beautiful scenery or something like that, or a garden, and you instantly think, what's going on? This is too nice, too good to be true kind of thing.
And the story's tending to focus on the seedy underbelly of that beautiful garden or whatever we're looking at.
Yeah, so it's like you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
That seems to come across in all these films.
So the other film that we watched this week is another great example of that have and have-nots. And there is a little bit of nice utopian areas in that film, but we're very much in the seedy underbelly of that world, aren't we? We're living on the streets. It's grimy. It's wet. It's cold. There's smoke absolutely everywhere in that film. But we do get glimpses into Tyrell's world, his pyramid structure that he appears to live and work in and probably never leave.
Yeah.
It's seemingly opulent, isn't it? It's supposed to be quite nice and wonderful, but
It's
still
like a massive
looks,
tower, isn't it?
Yeah, it still looks a bit grim. It looks a bit like Trump Tower. You know, he's living in this golden tomb, but it's still very smoky and dark inside there. He's still lighting it with candles, which gives it a kind of a gothic vibe towards the end when Roy Batty shows up there.
It is one of the few places in the film where you actually see any sunlight as well.
Yeah,
So
but then it's blocked out. It's said to be
blocked
too
out
bright.
as soon as it's there.
Yeah.
This is a bad one, the worst yet. There was an escape from the off-world colonies 2 weeks ago. 6 replicants, 3 male, 3 female. They slaughtered 20...
A Blade Runner's job is to hunt down replicants. Manufactured humans you can't tell from the real thing.
What's this? Roy Batty, probably the leader.
There was just one outfit making replicants that superhuman. The Tyrell Corporation.
So talking about Blade Runner, so Blade Runner came out in 1982.
Now, this is another movie with multiple versions, isn't it? Now,
Yeah.
I watched the final cut.
Ah, interesting, because I watched the theatrical version.
Really?
Yeah.
With the narration then?
Yeah, so Harrison Ford narrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I have seen that version, and it is... I had high hopes for the narration, because everyone says it's bad.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be good, because I like the idea of narration. It suits that kind of noir story,
Yeah,
doesn't
definitely.
it?
I
But-
did find it a little bit jarring when it kicked in at the start.
Yeah.
But then you get used to it.
It suffers from being like just not very well delivered, let's be honest. Like
Yeah.
he's great in that movie, but not his finest performance on the voice acting of the narration.
Well, apparently Harrison Ford didn't have much direction in general for that film because
Okay.
Ridley Scott was a lot more concerned with the look of it and the visuals.
I can
So he
imagine.
was busy doing that, whereas Harrison Ford was left to his own devices to try and come up with his character.
Right. So this was the version on Now TV, was there?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's the theatrical one.
So I kind of thought that the final cut had become the definitive version in the sense that Ridley Scott's kind of expunged the other ones from existence a little
Yeah,
bit, even though they're readily available.
It's probably to do with some sort of deal that Now TV has or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's very interesting. So what differences do you reckon there were? Do you know the differences between two cuts?
I know some of the differences. I know the broad strokes of it. I think people will be listening to this and they'll be getting mad at me if I get it wrong. But I know that the broad strokes are that probably in the version you've seen, is that the only version you've seen?
I can't remember any of the other ones I've seen previously.
So does he have a dream about a unicorn?
No, but I've heard about this.
So that's really essential to kind of a really important take on the film, which is that, so at the end of the film, does Edward James Olmos leave an origami unicorn?
There's an origami unicorn at the end, yeah.
But the origami unicorn's meaningless without knowing that Deckard has a dream about a unicorn. So they talk earlier on in the film, after he's done the Voight-Kampff test on Rachel, she comes to his flat and he's listing off a load of her personal memories. And I think my take on that was that it didn't come up in their conversation. Deckard had read a file or something. Deckard had access to her memories because she's a replicant, because those aren't her memories. The fact that Edward James Olmos can fold an origami unicorn and leave it outside Deckard's home suggests that he might know a specific memory of Deckard's, which is that he has a dream about a unicorn,
yeah.
which may then mean that Deckard is a replicant.
Yeah, I think we should go on to this later as well. The whole sort of like, is he, isn't he a replicant?
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's such
It's
a big...
crucial.
And it's like, it's going to be a question throughout like this film.
Yeah. And how does it end, theatrical cut?
So it ends with them driving off into the sunset.
Yeah. Which people refer to as like, oh, it's a really happy ending, which the other ones don't have. But essentially it's them escaping. Like we know that Rachel's a replicant. We know her life is in danger because she's a fugitive replicant, and basically they escape together.
Literally into the sunset. It's
right.
like nice and bright. There's no smog anywhere at all.
Okay.
And
That's interesting. The final cut, and I think in the director's cut, he goes back to his apartment. She's there. They leave together. He sees the unicorn, picks it up. They get in the lift together, and the door's closed, and that is the end of the film. It's broadly the same. I think the implications of the theatrical cut are because they're escaping into the sunset, we take it to mean they've got away, they're safe.
Yeah.
Whereas just ending on finding out that he might be a replicant actually is quite a menacing ending, and we have no idea what's going to happen to them when that lift gets to the ground floor. So we don't know if they escape. We don't know if they're getting out of the city.
I think that ending does fit better with the sort of the whole film and the content of it. Whereas this one, it does feel more sort of like your traditional happy ending, which it doesn't necessarily need. The film's so bleak other than that, it kind of seems a bit out of place. I mean, I liked the fact that they got away and it was all sort of like happy, but there's lots of things about their relationship that don't quite match up as well.
Yeah.
Like obviously when they first get together, it's a very sort of rapey scene.
It's horrible, yeah. He's not a particularly nice character, Deckard. He's very functional. We're on his side because we're arbitrarily assuming that he's the good guy and that the replicants are the bad guys.
And also when you watch the theatrical version, you've got the narrator and it's him. So you're naturally like, he's the character, he's the guy.
But he's drinking a lot. He's lost his job or quit his job for reasons that we don't go into detail on.
For whatever reason, he stopped being a Blade Runner.
Yeah, and he's very unpleasant to Rachel. And to what extent in the movie he's seeing her as a real human being at that point, it's still an awful way to act.
Yeah, because it's weird because the soundtrack in the theatrical version, at least, is a very sort of romantic soundtrack in the background when that's going on.
I think it's similar in the. I don't know. I haven't seen that in such a long time, but it is like the love scene music.
Yeah, because it's meant to look like a love scene,
like soft sax.
Yeah, that's it. And it's because it's who does the
Vangelis.
Vangelis. So his soundtrack is brilliant.
Phenomenal soundtrack.
Yeah.
Every time I've seen Blade Runner many times, and every time I watch it, I forget how good the soundtrack is. But the opening synth over the credits at the start, I'm immediately back in it. It's so
really
good.
Powerful. The love scene with Rachel and Deckard is just I still find it really creepy just thinking about it now.
Yeah, it's not loving. He's instructing her on what to say.
Pushed up against the wall.
He's violent with her.
Yeah, he doesn't let her leave.
Yeah. And then he instructs her on what to say, so there's no consent there because he's telling her what to say and she's saying it pretty much under duress. Definitely under duress. She can't leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And then later on, when you see her again, he's like, do you love me? And she's like, yes.
Yeah.
But you don't know if that's her really loving him all of a sudden, which would seem weird, or again, if it's just under duress and it's just kind of they're going through the motions now.
She doesn't really have any agency. And presumably that's deliberate because we're seeing different sides of the replicants in all of the different replicants. But it's interesting that she's a replicant that's only just learned that she is one and how she's dealing with that. And also what we're seeing in Deckard, who may or may not be one, and whether he's actually realising that or not. by the end of the movie.
Yeah, because obviously Deckard is supposed to be a character who has very little emotion and he doesn't care about these replicants. Yet when he reveals to Rachel that she's a replicant, he suddenly goes back and he's like, oh, I'm only joking, and suddenly shows a bit of compassion about it, which seems a bit out of character for him. And that's kind of the turning point, isn't it, when he starts looking at the replicants in a different way.
Yeah.
But
is that... and that conversation happens before she kills Leon, doesn't it? And when she kills Leon, they go back to his apartment and he says something like, have you got the shakes? Yeah, I get those too. So he obviously feels that. He feels some guilt. She's feeling awful because she's killed, let's say, someone. She's killed a person. She obviously feels that she's not dehumanized Leon, even though she was able to shoot him to save Deckard. But they both get the shakes. So they're both feeling guilt after an incident like that, whether that's just adrenaline or is that guilt over murder.
Yeah, and it's Rachel really picking a side because she could have killed Deckard if she wanted to be with the replicants, but she chose to kill Leon instead. It's very interesting that she did that rather than the other way around.
But then if you look at it as if Deckard is a replicant, then it's just 6 replicants who are fighting amongst themselves. There is no, the sides are something else. You know, there's Rachel and Deckard's side and there's the other 4 replicants side.
So at the start of the film, they say Nexus 6 model, there's 6 replicants on the loose.
They explicitly say there's 6 replicants.
Yeah, you only see 4 of them.
Yeah, they only ever introduce 4 at the police station who are all characters in the movie and get killed by Deckard and Rachel.
Ah, that's interesting.
But then it depends how you count, though. I mean, that obviously plays into the idea that he might be one, and then you have to ask, well, when did he become... When was he... if he's a replicant, when was he recruited to be a Blade Runner? Was it 2 days ago? Was it when the movie starts? Has he just had everything before the movie is a memory they've implanted so that they can set him loose on the other 4? But then, why?
Yeah. See, I didn't even notice the number thing until you just brought it up then. And I was just like, it just suddenly clicked.
Yeah, there's 6 on the loose. And that would imply that Rachel's one of them as well.
Yeah.
But obviously she's presumably been locked up in the Tyrell Tower.
Yeah, so she's not really on the loose.
No.
But yeah, it's interesting that they do use that particular number.
So I read the book a while ago.
How does that compare to this?
It's very, very, very different. There are some broad strokes of the plot which are in both. Deckard is a Blade Runner. I think he's retired because I know Holden's a character and they get him back to sort this out. But beyond that, the whole tone of each one is very different. But what's interesting is that there's bits in the book that maybe I'm going to make myself sound stupid here, but they're confusing, and I think they're deliberately confusing. There's a scene in the book in particular in a police station where characters are cross-talking and it's really hard to follow who's saying what to who and what they mean and do they even understand what each other are saying. And it's just incredibly confusing. So there's this scene that's and I think it's deliberately there to kind of capture the sense of paranoia that Deckard's going through at that time in the story. And I think the film does evoke a little bit of that. You're not quite sure. You can watch it multiple times. It's very deliberate that we don't know if Deckard's a replicant or not. But there's other things going on where you're not quite sure. Because if you follow that logic of Deckard is a replicant, there's lots of other things that don't make sense. Why have they recruited one of the 6 to kill the other 4 if you're able to do that?
Yeah.
What's so tricky about the other 4 or 5? One of the most interesting things in the book that is not present in the movie at all is the religion of that world. There's I think it's called Mercerism, and it's based on a person called something Mercer. And everyone goes into these booths in their homes that's kind of like a VR booth. I think you hold on to handles and you experience a vision of a man, or Deckard does. I don't know if it's different for different people, but he's experiencing a vision of a man struggling up a hill, and there's an angry mob who are throwing rocks at him. And it comes back to the whole point about empathy, which is incredibly important in the movie and incredibly important in the story, but their entire religion is based on a sense of empathy. It's set in a world with no animals, which is in the movie, but it's less explicit. They make references to not being able to afford a real snake.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a fake owl. But beyond that, it doesn't really explain much more, but it's in the future. It's so polluted, most animals have gone extinct. So Deckard in the book dreams of being able to afford a sheep. That's why it's called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Okay.
He wants to buy an electric sheep and it's a keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing. Like if you're well-to-do, you have an animal, but also everyone's kind of, I think in the book it's rude to ask if your sheep is artificial, because everyone's just sort of like, if you owned a real animal, that's an incredible status symbol.
Yeah.
So you don't sort of admit that your animal's not real.
Whereas in the film, you've got that bit with Zora, and as soon as he says, "Oh, is this a real snake?" she's like, "Of course, it's not a real snake. I can't afford
Yeah,
that."
I wouldn't be working here if I could afford a real snake. Yeah. So that's there in the background of the movie, but that's incredibly important to the Voight-Kampff test itself, because flipping over a turtle carries even more weight in the book, because animals are so precious because they're all going extinct, that if you wouldn't flip over a turtle, you really are an awful monster, because it could be the last turtle in the world.
Oh, mad.
So if you don't have empathy with those animals, you're a replicant.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing about the religion that kind of factors into the Voight-Kampff test in the book, and it's there in the movie. It's the baseline of that test in the movie. But I think I saw the film before I read the book, and it gives that question at the very start about the turtle or the tortoise. It makes it seem quite surreal if you don't have any of that knowledge about what's going on with animals in that world. It's just like, they're just trying to catch out an android with a weird question.
It does add a whole nother sort of layer to it. And I know there's lots of things about the civilization which doesn't really come across until... So I know people which have watched the documentaries about Blade Runner previously, and there's bits like, so obviously the way they speak and the sort of gutter language, which is a mix of Spanish, Japanese, English.
Okay, I did wonder, because obviously there's lots of there's a mixture of cultures visually, but I think Edward James Olmos himself is Latin.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was him throughout the whole film, and then I looked it up on IMDb afterwards, and I was really shocked that
he doesn't look like Adama,
not
does
at all.
he?
Yeah. And he's got those freaky blue eyes as well.
Yeah, I don't think that's his natural eyes, is it? Gaff. So
Yeah.
there's an interesting bit at the start where Gaff first shows up and is trying to haul Deckard in to come and do the job. Now Deckard's just been speaking to the food server, who doesn't seem to understand him.
Yeah.
Then Gaff shows up speaking another language that Deckard doesn't understand, and the food server translates for him in good English.
Yeah.
So it's a weird melting pot of languages going on in 2019 Los Angeles.
And in the theatrical version, Harrison Ford afterwards says, "Of course I knew that language. I just wasn't going to tell him that I knew what he was saying."
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that was like a nice little touch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that they've got all these different cultures which have kind of mixed together. And I know with, what's his name again?
Gaff.
Gaff. I was going to say Goff.
Guff.
Gaff. His name's Gaff. So Gaff, the reason Edward James Olmos, I'll get there in the end with all these names.
That's right.
The reason he's got blue eyes is because he wanted to capture the fact that it's like a melting pot of different sort of people and lots of different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds. Obviously, like you said, he's Latin, yet he's got blue eyes. So I think that was all deliberate for that, because I know a lot of people thought, what was going on with his eyes when they saw it?
Yeah, and of course, similarly at the end of the movie, Gaff speaks perfect English.
Yeah.
So it was all an act, or it was all a deliberate play by him. But he says that very amazing, poignant line at the end of, "Oh, it's a shame she won't live, but then again, who does?"
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
he keeps hearing that, doesn't he? Yeah.
So that really reminded me of Serenity and Firefly. You know, that's another
Definitely
futuristic culture where they very deliberately blended Western and Eastern.
Yeah.
And I think in some of the background plots, I think it's probably explored in the comics and stuff that I haven't read, but I think they do explicitly go and explain it, that it was just the two sort of spacefaring cultures that went and colonized other worlds were the big superpowers, which would be the West and the East, and it naturally just became a melting pot.
Definitely. And I think it's a very sort of... it's a very possible vision of the future that obviously at some point all these cultures and different languages are going to merge together.
But I think that must have been a very realistic thing in Los Angeles in 1982, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And again, you got comparisons between the whole Tower of Babel stuff going on in Metropolis.
They were trying to reach heaven, weren't they?
Yeah,
and as a punishment for that, God created languages, didn't he?
And made them speak all different languages and scattered them around.
Yeah, as a punishment so they couldn't communicate with each other.
Whereas in this film and like Firefly and things like that, all these different languages are sort of merging into one. And again, you're seeing sort of these cultures coming together.
Hey, 81.
Monsieur, Admiral Kovachin Engam Bite. He say you under arrest, Mr. Decker.
Got the wrong guy, pal.
Lofa, Negochma. Te vaya play, He say you Blade Runner.
Tell him I'm eating.
Captain Brian Toga. Enio Mayo.
Brian, huh?
So in this movie, I do think we see the mediator of the heart. That kind of theme definitely comes back into it for the replicants, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because these are robots who have been designed not to have any emotions, but we find out quite early on that they are expected to develop their own emotions over time. But that's seen as a problem, isn't it? They deliberately build them so that they won't last very long after they start to develop emotions, if at all.
It's like 4 years, isn't it, that they're given?
They give them a 4-year lifespan just to make sure that if they are going to develop emotions, they'll just die.
Yeah. I mean, that's an easy way out for them, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so what is it that Tyrell says? Because they burn twice as brightly, they have half the life or something like that.
The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long.
That's it. That's
the one. And then
he
says, and you've burned so bright, Roy.
Yeah, that's...
Revel in it.
And obviously you see how at the start they make that premise that all of the replicants are either equal or superior to the humans in that first little blurb that comes up.
Yeah.
And you've got Roy beating Tyrell at chess very easily in all these
in
little
2
bits.
moves. It's a bit. How did Sebastian get 2 moves away from checkmate?
JF Sebastian, he is a really interesting character as well.
Very weird character. He is in the book, but I can't remember a great deal about his plot in the book.
Yeah, like
when he says he's 25, I always forget that line. It's like, oh yeah, he's 25.
Yeah, I'm 25, but you look 38.
Yeah, he looks 38. He must be played by someone. William Sanderson, is it?
Yeah, it's William Sanderson who plays JF Sebastian.
So William Sanderson's certainly more than 25, but they've also aged up William Sanderson beyond his own age at that time, haven't they? Because he's got kind of like wrinkly makeup on. Yeah.
But then you've got his plight of being young but growing older, and that directly relates to the replicants who are only about they must be like 4.
They range, I think, between like 2, 3, and 4. I think, don't they? I think Roy's the oldest. He's coming right up to his 40.
Yeah,
well, we know he comes up to
Pris
his span.
as well, because Pris, they keep saying that Pris hasn't got very much longer.
Do you think that she didn't have much longer? Because they do say their birth dates, I think, so we could check, I think. But I very much got the sense that, because Roy says that to Sebastian, he says, you have to help us or Pris doesn't have long left.
Yeah.
But I think that's him being a bit manipulative of Sebastian, because obviously Pris has kind of seduced Sebastian a little bit to get in there, and Roy is aware of that. But really, we know that Roy is the one who is coming right up to his lifespan, because he expires at the end of the movie. So he's so close. He's pouring with sweat when he's in Tyrell's place. That I take that to be like a symptom of the aging process that he's coming up on so fast. So I really read that as a bit of manipulation from Batty.
That's interesting. I just took it at face value. I was just like, I completely had trust in what Roy was saying.
I mean, broadly speaking, all 4 of those quote unquote bad guy replicants, they are coming up to their lifespan. It's just to what extent. Leon doesn't know, does he?
Yeah, because he asks Deckard, he was like, oh, when was I born?
Yeah,
How
he doesn't
long
know
have
his
I got
birthday.
left?
He doesn't know how long he's got left. And that's his driving thing. Roy quotes the same thing later, the idea of living in fear and how awful it is. That's where Leon's at, and that's his entire motivation, isn't it? And it's the same for all of them, I guess. They're angry and they're violent. They've developed anger as an emotion, and they are feeling that anger about their upcoming death. Roy's amazing speech at the end, the Tears in Rain speech, is the most famous moment out of the film.
That is just brilliant.
That's a mind that's just developed the emotions maybe to have feelings about the wonderful things he's seen. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he saw C-beams glitter off the Tannhauser Gate.
Yeah.
But now he does. He's finally able to appreciate it, but that appreciation means that he's about to die.
That's it. And he finally sort of proves his humanity by choosing to save Deckard's life rather than letting him go. Whereas before he was killing all these humans who he thought were lower than him.
Yeah.
And then his final act was to be like, okay, no, I value life more now, so I'm going to save you.
Was that what you took that to be?
That's what I took,
I think that is a good take on it. I wasn't sure why he saved him. I didn't know if it was just a sense of, because he could, to show that he was better than Deckard maybe, or maybe because he knew Deckard was a replicant.
Yeah, I think he's just finally realised the value of life, because obviously he spent so long trying to sort of prove that he could, trying to live longer.
Yeah.
And then at the end he's like, right, well, this is it. I just need to...
Time to die.
Yeah, that's it. Oh.
So what's your take on Roy then? Is Roy a villain? Is he a bad guy?
This is the tricky thing. When you see him initially, you just think he is a bad guy. And the whole bit at the end when he's chasing after Deckard, he's terrifying.
He's really scary.
Yeah,
the
with
last
the wolf
20 minutes.
sounds, and he's running after him, and it's crazy. But that end bit kind of changes your perspective on it completely. And you see it from his point of view, because you spend so long looking at it from Deckard's point of view, suddenly you switch and you're like, actually, maybe these guys have a point. If your life was running out, maybe you would act like this. You would go to any means in order to sort of live that bit longer.
Rutger Hauer's amazing in this film, and he does such a good job of, at the start, he's so powerful, and all throughout, he's threatening, malicious, and scary. And then... really, I mean, it is mostly just the tears in rain speech, which is always shorter than I remember it. But he brings so much, you become so empathic towards him in that moment.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time. Like tears in rain. Time to die.
And when we talk about worlds of the future, which is what we're discussing, his speech really opens such a door on that, because we're seeing the dystopic Earth in Los Angeles 2019. It's rotten. It's, it looks like it smells pretty bad. It's smoky and wet and depressing. But we're
constantly raining.
Constantly raining, but we're constantly being advertised off-world. You must go off-world.
Yeah, I was going to talk about this, because the whole... Why have the replicants come back to Earth when it is this post-apocalyptic hell, basically?
Exactly. And that's the question. I mean, Deckard asked that, doesn't he? He says to his boss, why are they coming back? And his boss doesn't have a straight answer for him. And we find out it's because they think they might be able to grasp just a little bit more life if they go and see Tyrell, or if they find the man who makes the eyes,
But the man who makes the eyes is great.
That's a great
James
scene.
Hong. Have you seen him in other stuff?
Maybe. Who is he?
You need to watch Big Trouble in Little China.
Okay.
He's in that, and he's in so many films of that era.
Right.
And he's quality in all
He's
of them.
very good in this.
Yeah. He always plays that sort of wacky character.
Right.
And that whole scene is brilliant as well. Because you don't quite understand what's going on when you first go into it.
Yeah.
And then bit by bit, you sort of piece it together. When you first see the eyes, you're kind of like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then you realise that it's for the replicants. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. Why are they even making the replicants if they're so dangerous? Why has Tyrell made Rachel when replicants have just been outlawed because they're too dangerous?
I don't know. Is it sort of do with the whole reason that Rotvang is doing it? Is he looking into like how to prolong life to a point, maybe? But then they only last for like 4 years.
Yeah, and Tyrell openly says that the purpose is commerce, right?
Yeah.
It's all-
Well, they're slaves, aren't they?
yeah, but how can that commerce industry coexist with Blade Runners who are specially trained cops that kill replicants? Like it just seems really strange that they would be building these slaves that are so dangerous. If they are on Earth, they must be destroyed.
Yeah, it is weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose they want to keep the slaves in line, and maybe if in Metropolis they had someone like policing them, like a Blade Runner,
Yeah.
then they wouldn't have to have got the machine Maria down there and sort all that out.
Do you know about the history of the name Blade Runner? Have you
Yeah,
read
so
up
it's
on this?
from
I don't understand.
It's
it.
from another science fiction film franchise, which the film company had bought at the same time.
Right.
Because what do they call them in the book?
I've no idea.
Yeah, because they
I'll
don't.
find
Even,
out.
they're not even called replicants either, are they? They're like
No, I think they're just
Andes,
called.
or-
Yeah, they call them Andes. Yeah.
Yeah.
they're just androids.
So you've got that, and then apparently what they did, they had this other film franchise with Blade Runners in. They were like, "That's a cool name."
Is that all it is?
Yeah,
It's
let's
just cool.
let's call them Blade
Okay.
Runners because it works. And then that became the whole title of the film.
Oh, he's referred to as a bounty hunter in the book.
Ah,
Yeah, he gets paid a specific amount per android that he kills, and that's his whole career. I don't think he's associated with the police, but that's his driving force. Because if he can kill 6 next or however many androids there are in the book, the bounty's going to be big enough that he can buy his wife an electric sheep or some kind of animal. Yeah, he's got like marital problems as
Yeah.
well. His wife hates him.
oh, they mentioned that a bit in the narration. In
Has
the
he got a
theatrical
wife?
version, he says something like, was when he's having the sushi and the noodles. He says, "My wife always used to compare me to sushi. I was a bit of a cold fish." Yeah, so there's like little bits like that in there, which are just brilliant.
Right.
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession. Ex-cop. Ex-Blade Runner. Ex-killer.
Rutger Hauer's speech is opening a little doorway onto the world around the dystopia that we see. So we're constantly advertised off-world, and that's the place to go. And Sebastian couldn't go there; he failed the medical.
I forgot about that. Yeah,
It's where everyone wants to go. It's where the androids have come back from. It's what they're using the androids to basically create and build and maintain.
you never get an idea of what these worlds look like. All you see is that neon sign saying "Go off world now."
Yeah.
So you have no idea.
And all you get is in that great speech, he is talking about this universe that you suddenly realize is so much bigger. Because what you see on screen is a relatively realistic depiction of a grim city. You got flying cars and all of that, but it's very much linked to familiar stuff, and it's just slightly enhanced. But then when he starts talking about attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion,
Yeah.
I don't even know what a C-beam is or what Tannhauser Gate is, but we've suddenly got a tiny glimpse into an enormous universe in the background of this story.
Yet this city, which they depict in this film, is used again and again in different films. So again, like we were saying with Metropolis, so this city looks like the one in Akira. It looks like the one in Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
The Matrix. Pretty much any post-apocalyptic dystopia.
Yeah.
This is the city which it really looks like.
It's a great depiction of an overly bloated, polluted city.
Yeah. And they've got all the adverts everywhere. So you've got the Coca-Cola advert, TDK,
Yeah.
Atari, like all these adverts are just everywhere. And if you go to like Leicester Square, you see all these adverts down there, and the comparisons are just obvious.
Yeah, similar to Metropolis, it's very relatable to things that we see in our own world. It's a smoggy, overpopulated city with a heavy advertising presence, and we both live in one of them.
Yeah, that's it. And again, it's that what could happen. It's very close to
Yeah.
what. And again, it was set in 2019. It's 2019. We're not quite in the whole realm
Yeah.
of replicants and that kind of post-apocalyptic extreme, but it is still relevant.
A lot of it's very believable, and it ties into our own world in a really nice way.
And the factories you see at the beginning with all the explosions everywhere, it just seems like hell, really.
Yeah.
When you first see that eye, that amazing shot of the eye and what's reflected in it.
There's a lot with eyes in this movie, isn't there? Because all of the replicants have sort of red eye, don't they?
Yeah.
Which I think is for our benefit, isn't it? Because if it was as simple as seeing the red eye, obviously Deckard's job would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
But we see it in Rachel. She's obviously a replicant. We see it in the owl.
Yeah.
And we see it several times with Pris and Batty.
Did you see it in Harrison Ford?
I didn't. I was looking for it. I was wondering if we were going to get a flash of it or if that'd be too on the nose.
I don't know if it's just the theatrical version, but I swear there is one bit when him and Rachel are talking in the apartment. They're talking about something specifically about the whole replicant dilemma.
Yeah.
And he's in the background and he has those same eyes.
Oh, wow. I'll definitely be watching out for that next time I see it. Is it in the same scene where she asks him, have you ever done that test on yourself?
I think it might be in a later scene. I can't remember offhand.
Right.
But yeah, that's an interesting moment as well, because she's just about to ask, have you done the test? And he's just passed out drunk.
Yeah.
How convenient.
Yeah. The test is really important, isn't it? It's, well, if we look at this film in the context of artificial intelligence, the big question mark over the film is what's not human about the replicants, or what's so much better about the humans than the replicants. You know, obviously they're incredibly violent. So Zora, for example, she's pretty safe. She's pretty non-threatening. She hasn't teamed up with Pris and Batty. She's not trying to get to Tyrell. I don't really know what she wants to achieve from working in that nightclub and all of that, but it doesn't really seem to matter. She's just getting on with her own thing. And if Deckard never showed up there, he does all of that detective work. You know, he finds the snake scale, he traces it back to the snake manufacturer, and then he's able to find her and murder her. Like, but if he hadn't done any of that, had she killed anyone? Was she violent?
Yeah, we don't know. And that again, that whole scene is brilliant. And that again, that's another emotional turning point for Deckard, because when he shoots Zora, he suddenly feels remorse, and that's the first time you see him feeling remorse about any replicants, really.
Yeah, even though presumably he's had a long career of killing them.
And is when she's running through those glass display cases, and there's mannequins everywhere, and the mannequins, I feel like there's lots of scenes where you've got mannequins or you've got dolls, and the whole dolls replicants sort of theme and motif is everywhere throughout the film.
And later on, there's a great scene. I love the last half hour or so. Everything from when Deckard arrives at the Bradbury building and he's going in, and that's where the final showdown happens. When he first goes in, it's so creepy and scary when he's walking through the mannequins.
Yeah.
And Pris is obviously hiding as a mannequin. There are several mannequins there. There are also several human actors who are just sitting still. Like there's a woman posed on the bed who just makes a few repetitive gestures.
That's the thing, a lot of them are sort of moving in the background. And throughout all those scenes up in JF Sebastian's house, there's always something in the background moving.
Yeah.
And you're a bit like, what's going on over there?
Yeah, and they're mixing up the real actors with the mannequins or the props.
What did you think about the teddy bear, the one with the teddy bear face, and the Napoleon one with the big nose?
Yeah, JF Sebastian's little creations.
They're so weird.
They're a bit weird, aren't they? I like the way the Napoleon looking one kind of bumps into a door later on when Deckard goes in there and he's looking for the replicants. I like the way that he was just walking along and he bumped into the door and he kept going, as if he's just doing that all day, every day, until Sebastian comes home, and then he says, welcome home, or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's it. He's just on a loop.
Such a pitiful little life that creation's got.
Yeah, there's that moment when Pris is there, and you can tell she's she's got all her makeup on, and she looks really menacing. And that little toy one with the long nose keeps looking at her like, this isn't right, this looks a bit dodgy. So you don't really know what his...
And he's got a bit of fear in his eyes.
Yeah. I found that interesting, because you do think he's just on a loop and he's just a toy. But that moment, you really see there's something going on.
It makes you wonder, if he's less than the sum of his parts, maybe, because we don't get a lot of detail on the creation of those things, do we? We know that JF Sebastian works for Tyrell. He's a genetic engineer, genetic scientist, something like that. But at the same time, Sebastian doesn't seem like the most smart guy. But he's able to create these own creations. But what's he using to create them? Is he using bits and bobs that he's got access to at the Tyrell factory? And to what extent do those bits and bobs have a greater level of intelligence than Sebastian's maybe able to like put together properly. Like, what's the brain in those little creations? Is it on the same level as this amazing Nexus 6 brain? And he's rammed it into bits and bobs that don't work well, or has he just built a brain himself and put it in there? Yeah. We don't get that kind of detail.
Must get lonely here, champ.
Not really. I make friends. They're toys. My friends are toys. I make them. It's a hobby. I'm a genetic designer. Do you know what that is?
No.
Now. Oh. Yoo-hoo! Home again.
Home again, diggity-dip. Good evening, JF.
Evening, fellas.
JF Sebastian seems really childlike as well.
Yeah.
Like, he's got all these toys, and you see Roy doing that brilliant moment when he gets the sort of goggly eyes and puts them on and sort of like, we're your friends.
Yeah.
And it's little bits like that which make me think you're right in your previous assumption that he was sort of playing JF in the way that he was talking about Pris's lifespan.
Yeah, definitely.
That kind of thing.
And what's the fate of JF? Because Batty kills Tyrell in a really gruesome scene. He crushes his head with his bare hands. And then
Which is great.
Yeah. And then he turns to Sebastian and he says, come, come. It's very scary, that last half an hour or so. That is very creepy when he's stalking through the mannequins.
Yeah.
And then it becomes very intense when Batty's stalking him through. Pris's death is
terrifying.
So gruesome, the way she's wriggling around on the floor.
But it's like she's having a weird tantrum at the same time. Again, going back to the childlike thing, she looks like she's in the midst of a wobble.
So why are the replicants seen as such a threat? Why is artificial intelligence in this film depicted as a threat? We know that they're powerful, but why must they be killed?
Well, at the beginning, they say they've killed lots of people.
And that's just the 6 that are on the loose.
Yeah, so they kind of reason it out that these replicants are murdering people. They need to be put down or retired, as they say.
But it's also introduced that Blade Runners are a thing. A Blade Runner is a job that retires replicants. So that must exist before these 6 Nexus 6s went on a killing spree and came back to Earth. So why is Blade Runner a job?
I think it's got to be to do with the emotions, hasn't it? Because they say the reason they're restricted to 4 years is because any time after that, they start to get all these emotions, and there's the risk of them becoming superior to humans, I guess.
So there's a threat that it's just seen that if they do develop a heart, to take it back to the kind of Metropolis similarities, if they do develop that heart, they're going to become a danger to humanity. So that's really interesting that it's kind of an opposite take on that idea, because in Metropolis, the idea is kind of that the machinery needs the heart to connect with the head, and then the whole system works much better. Whereas in Blade Runner, we're saying if the machine develops a heart, that's a problem and we need to stop it immediately.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? So emotions are both such a fundamental thing in both films.
And at the same time, in both cases, human emotions can elevate artificial intelligence to the next level. But they see it as a threat in one and as a benefit in the other.
Yeah, because you don't see a lot of humanity in any of the humans in Blade Runner.
No.
The only person you really see is in JF Sebastian. Yeah, because he does that when he meets Pris and he's like, oh, yeah, you can come up for some food, that kind of thing. Other than that, you don't see any sort of likeableness in any of the characters.
No one's really got much of a heart. Deckard, obviously, we assume him to be the main human character, and he's, like you said, he's very emotionless until he starts to feel remorse for killing these replicants.
Yeah.
So there's some really great hand acting.
Acting?
Yeah, at the end of this movie.
Oh, the whole scene at the...
Yeah, and you made me think of it when you were talking about Rotvang's hand, because that's some good hand acting as well, when he's really gesticulating with his presumably metal hand. But yeah, it's really grisly at the end of Blade Runner, isn't it? Harrison Ford really sells us on how much pain he's going through with two broken fingers, although I think he achieves a lot more than a person with 2 broken fingers would.
Yeah, definitely.
But when he's climbing up there at the top of the film and he's holding his two smaller fingers above
it's
the other ones.
painful to watch, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really great. And then he bandages them back up. And this is cut against Roy driving a nail through his own hand.
Yeah.
Presumably just doing that to... it seems like he's trying to get adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, he's trying to feel pain in order to sort of stay alive.
Yeah, which is really interesting because we don't know what the kind of biomechanics of these androids are. But he needs that. And it's very gruesome when he does that.
And it's quite sort of, it's like martyr-like, isn't it?
Yeah,
the way,
definitely.
it's a good way he's putting nails into his hand.
Yeah. Smearing blood all over himself from Pris. Very weird.
It's so freaky. And there's the weird animal sounds he's making, the howls.
Well, he's carrying that bird at the end, isn't he? Which is a very strange moment in
I
the
found
film.
that really bizarre because all of a sudden he's just got a dove in his hand.
Yeah.
He's just carrying it around in a really weird way.
Which, if I didn't love this movie so much, I would say was a really clumsy, cheesy kind of metaphor. But
Just so
I
he can
love
release it at the
Exactly,
end.
yeah. But I do love it. And of course, I guess we have to assume that's not a real dove,
I mean,
given what we
hopefully
know.
not.
No, but I mean within the plot of the film, given
Oh,
what
of
we know
course, yeah.
about real animals in that world, presumably that's a artificial dove that Roy has access to, maybe created
Yeah.
by Sebastian sitting around in his house or something.
That would make more sense if it's just there.
Which, with some context from the book, you would never do. If you had a bird, you would have to keep it caged up because it costs you a fortune. You would never want your electronic bird to escape.
And again, this final scene with Deckard and Roy is just like the Frida and Rotvang scene in Metropolis. They're both fighting on some sort of... It looks like a gothic roof, and there's the whole threat of falling, and you get this whole symbolism again.
Yeah, the fall of man, like you're talking about. Yeah, I like the way they used the building, the Bradbury, named after Ray Bradbury. It's a really decrepit, falling apart. It really nicely reflects what Roy is going through, which is that his body's falling apart around him. There's this building that's falling apart. Literally, it's got holes in it. It's dripping through. Deckard's smashing through floors and climbing through them, and it's this rotting old building, which is similar to what Roy's body is going through.
And there was that brilliant bit where Roy sticks his head through the wall.
So he smashes his head through the bathroom tiles, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then what does he say? He says something that doesn't make a lot of sense. He says something like, "You've got to be alive to play the game." And then he seems confused and he loses track of what he's saying. He kind of shakes his head.
It was definitely sort of a "here's Johnny" moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Harrison Ford's face throughout the entirety of that. The panic on his face, panic and confusion at everything Roy is doing and saying. He doesn't understand what's happening.
It's because Roy his character just changes. It's like he's got no boundaries now. Before, he's always seemed quite measured, and he's a very powerful character. He's measured, he's calculating. In this last bit, he just does not give a fuck. He's just going crazy. He's running around.
So I think we're seeing more and more as he gets closer to the end of his lifespan. So is his access to emotions. So the emotions are coming in more intensely and evolving, and it's hitting him so hard that he's turning into this insane mess that's howling at the moon and running around naked trying to kill Deckard.
Yeah.
I don't think Batty fully understands what he's doing in those moments. I think he's really overcome by emotions that he's not equipped to understand and process. It's like he's suddenly hit puberty at 4 years old and also a grown man. All of that happening at the same time inside his brain.
And he almost appeals to Deckard's sort of... Well, he calls Deckard out at one point. He says, "Why are you shooting an unarmed man?"
But again, I think that's Roy Batty's kind of manipulative side coming out. And he's kind of taunting him, isn't he? Because he knows that he will absolutely destroy Deckard in a hand-to-hand fight.
That's it.
Maybe, although Deckard might be a replicant, which would imply that he's also very, very strong.
You never know. But Deckard seems really small in all the scenes. When he's climbing up the wall to try and get away. Yeah. He just seems really tiny. And
he's very insect-like, scrambling up the walls, isn't he? Yeah.
Compared to Roy, who's very menacing. And
Roy, who's stripped off at that point, and he's like...
alpha male, here I am.
Yeah. smeared in blood on his face. And,
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
You better get it up. I'm gonna have to kill you. Unless you're alive, you can't play, and if you don't play... Six, seven. Go to hell or go to heaven.
So I didn't realise this. I think it might have been in the back of my head somewhere, but I was looking up Ridley Scott before watching this just to remind myself about what he's done previously. And he did the Hovis advert.
Yes, he did.
Which I'd completely forgotten.
Which I think Tony Scott stars in.
Yeah. So is Tony Scott his brother?
Tony Scott's his brother, and I think he's the little boy in the Hovis ad.
Ah. So that's interesting. So I know I don't know if Ridley's got more than one brother, but... So basically Ridley, his brother had died before he made Blade Runner.
Oh.
And apparently a lot of the sort of themes about humanity and life came from his experience with dealing with the death of his brother.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, he passed away. So I think that comes across a lot in the film. Sort of, he's very, very keen on getting this sort of depiction of life and death and how important everything is in Blade Runner itself.
Oh, wow. Cool. That's really interesting, though. And you definitely see that coming across, that kind of someone who's just angry and railing against the futility of their life coming to an end.
Yeah.
But he can't accept that there's nothing that can be done. He's searching for a cure. The disease for him is just his own mortality. His natural lifespan is coming to an end, but he's desperately seeking a cure. There's that scene between him and Tyrell where they're bouncing back ideas for what can be done. I don't know what the language they're using there. I don't know if it's just pure made-up techno-babble, but Roy's suggesting something and then Tyrell immediately counters and says, no, we can't do that. It turns into a virus. It kills the subject.
Yeah, and I think Ridley Scott, having had all that kind of stuff in his head when he was making the film, I think that's part of the reason he made it more about... So he the part of the bit from the book, from what I understand, and he made this dystopia more about the two men that are sort of dealing with these life-altering events. So obviously Deckard dealing with his conscience and having to sort of go on and his idea of life and death, and obviously Roy dealing with his own mortality and having to face that in knowing that he hasn't got very long left, and how he can he try and extend his life or should he accept it? And it's only when he finally accepts it, just at the very end, you see that very sort of like, you get that such a moving speech at the end when he sort of gets that enlightenment. But that Hovis advert's great.
I thought you were gonna. I thought you had like a link between like the set design or something. I thought it was gonna be like, and that world of the Hovis advert is the basis of the future world.
I just wanted to bring up the Hovis advert because I love bread.
Oh yeah.
This is something which I think all the listeners should know.
Yeah, you're something of a bread and film historian, and when those two worlds intersect, wow, that's really...
Yeah, I am in my zone. So in the final cut, did they ever talk about Rachel's expiration date?
No. Do they talk about that?
So yeah, just at the very end, when they're driving off into the sunset for this romantic ending,
right?
Even after the rapey scene, there's a voiceover from Harrison Ford, and he says Tyrell told him that Rachel has no expiration date, or something like that. So they don't know how long she's going to last.
Right.
So it's like, oh, happily ever after, because she's not going to die in 4 years.
That's awfully convenient. Isn't it? But is that after Gaffs said it's a shame she won't live?
Yeah, this is after, even though,
So that does, I think that's why people call it a bit of a tacked on happy ending, because they must have like just added that narration in to make it seem a bit happier.
Yeah.
No, the final cut leaves you thinking, they're fugitives, they're probably not safe. We don't know how safe they're even going to be after they go down in that lift. Deckard might not even be a real human, meaning they've both got less than 4 years left to live, even if they do escape.
So why do you think this film was so successful in the end? Because I know it didn't do very well when it first came out. I think a lot of people saw a sci-fi film, Harrison Ford, looks like an action. They went in expecting that. And it is quite slow paced.
It's very slow paced. And it's interesting you say that, because I first saw this movie when I was very young, like a kid. My dad let me watch this film, and I thought it was so boring.
Yeah,
And
a lot of people that I've spoken to have said that same thing.
yeah, and the only scene I could really remember that stuck with me for a long time was, and I still think it's a bit of a silly scene, the scene where he loads up the photo on the computer and it's zoom in, enhance, zoom in, enhance.
I love that scene,
Do
though.
you? It's like the worst movie example of the overused zoom in, enhance thing.
It is a lot. He does do it for a long time.
He
It does
goes
get a bit
inside a
painful.
reflection and round the back of it. It's ridiculous. And that was the only scene I could remember, because even as a little kid, I was like, this is stupid and boring. So why is it so successful? It's such an intense exploration of what we really think about as being a human. I think it's gained a cult following because it's a film that really rewards multiple viewings. You get something different out of it every time. We've touched on the question of whether Deckard is a replicant or not.
So do you think he is a replicant?
So I have a bit of a problem with that, because I think that's such a big question and it's like so important. And generally when people talk about films that are a bit ambiguous, they want to ask a question like that that's like yes or no.
Yeah.
But whereas I watch a film like Blade Runner and I think, well, it's very deliberately, like a lot of effort has gone into making it unclear whether or not he's a replicant. In the director's cut and the final cut, the only definitive evidence to my mind is the fact that Gaff might have access to a very private memory of, or what Deckard thinks of as a very private memory.
The unicorn thing.
Yeah. And I think there's other stuff you can point to once you're thinking that, but that's the only really thing. But how do we know that Deckard didn't work with Gaff before and Deckard used to talk about unicorns?
Yeah.
Like, it's not enough to hang or a yes or a no on. Do you think he's a replicant?
See, I don't know. Again, I think you've got it completely right there, because it's a film which is not about answering that question. It's about posing the question, how do you know, and what is it to be human? And it's not about whether he is a replicant or not, although I think he probably is.
Why?
Well, I think it's just because I've seen that one little scene and I could see the flash in his eyes.
Right, yeah.
And just all the other little sort of, is he, isn't he? And it would make more sense for the start of the film if he's just sort of been plonked there. You start there because he's just got all these memories, and that's why they come back to him. Yeah, because they skim over a lot of his past and that kind of thing.
So, yeah, it's a bit of a get out to say that I don't know and I don't really care. But I love ambiguity like that in films. And for me, the key question of Blade Runner is not, is Deckard a replicant, but what does it mean to Deckard if he is a replicant? What does it mean to Deckard if he doubts his own humanity? What does it mean for what he's doing, going around killing potentially other replicants, who also, over the course of the movie, we empathise with.
Yeah.
And we start to see as more human. So who are these people who are killing each other, and what gives them the right to kill each other, and what does all of that mean to them?
Have you seen the sequel?
No, I need to see it. I really wanted to see it at the cinema because I know I love Denis Villeneuve.
Maybe we should do another episode on the sequel at some point.
Okay, that's a good shout.
Yeah.
And I know it's Denis Villeneuve, and I know that if we talk about Denis Villeneuve, then I'll start talking about Dune again. And I can't talk about Dune in every episode of this podcast.
We can talk about Dune a little bit. So you know the new film is coming out.
Yeah,
what do you think
hyped
about that, and what have you found out about it so far?
I don't know much about it. I know people who've been cast, because I've got a friend who also loves Dune, and he texts me every time a new casting is announced. Let's go and see it together and then do a podcast.
Fantastic.
After it comes out, because I'm gonna lose my fucking mind when it comes out, James. But also, I think it might be so shit. Like Denis Villeneuve.
I mean, can it get
good.
worse than the David Lynch one though?
I mean, I do quite like that. But
oh no.
It's my favourite sci-fi book. I love it.
You're gonna have an attachment to it.
I'm gonna have an attachment, but at the same time, it's an absolutely bonkers thing to put on screen. There is so much plot and action that is happening in the thoughts of the characters.
Yeah.
Communication, like story is driven forward by conversations that are happening non-verbally. There's a whole language which is people tapping their fingers like against each other or on their leg, and it's like a secret message language. So characters will be having an entire conversation, and also tapping out an entirely different conversation, which is the real conversation, the real message they're trying to communicate, while they're having a superficial conversation for any listening ears. Put that on film.
Yeah.
It's
How
literally
do you do
impossible.
that?
Yeah. So I'm interested to see how it goes, because Villeneuve seems like a director who, well, that thing about the communication is really interesting, because he made Arrival, didn't he?
Yeah.
So he's a director that's not afraid to deal with difficult stories about strange languages and what the meaning of those strange languages are. So maybe he can handle stuff like that, and we'll see how that goes. He's also a director who's not afraid of slow pace, is he? He can handle that, and Dune does have quite a lot of that, although a lot of great action as well. No, I'm excited.
It's going to be good. Hopefully it'll be good. Fingers crossed.
I haven't seen 2049, and I've heard it's quite good, and I do want to see it, but obviously, like, it poses the immediate problem, which is that Harrison Ford is in it and he's old.
Yeah. There is that.
I think both of these films, when they're in terms of their depiction of a future world, there's definitely relatable elements. What I said about the kind of the commute feeling of Metropolis and the smoggy pollution feeling in Blade Runner. It's also interesting that both films, you said before that Ridley Scott was not giving a lot of direction to his actors because he was so focused on the visuals.
Yeah.
This, like Metropolis, is a film that just beats you over the head with its stunning visuals. It's such an impressive movie. It's got a lovely practical design sense. There's lots of models, there's lots of physical flying cars, which are incredibly impressive. You know, it goes back to what I was saying about what I like about Metropolis is seeing all the effort in a film. You can see the effort coming out of Blade Runner's creation.
And it's so intertwined, you don't really notice it. Nothing seems out of place. The fact that these cars are flying doesn't seem weird in the world he's created.
Yeah, I love the scene where he's outside of the apartment and he has a bit of dialogue with the police car. The police car flies down and tells him to move along. What are you doing? And he goes, I'm doing my job. What are you doing? But yeah, that interaction of when that car kind of flies into the scene, it looks great. I don't know what it looked like in the version you saw, but one of the things that stands out a little bit in the final cut is there are a few scenes where you do see a CGI flying car just sort of whiz by.
Yeah,
it doesn't really take you out of it, but it's a bit similar to that feeling of the remastered Star Wars films where a giant beast stomps through the scene really unnecessarily. It's got a bit of that because we see so many cool practical car effects that it's just a bit unnecessary to use the CGI. It's one of the most visually stunning sci-fi movies, isn't it?
Yeah, and it dawned the whole cyberpunk era and everything, and all of those things which came off the back of it. And again, like we were saying, the way it depicts these cities and androids with emotions and all these this complex subject matter, I think it's essential viewing because it's got all of these things, and it's where a lot of these other things have originated from. So without something like Blade Runner, the way a lot of these future sci-fi films look would be completely different. They just wouldn't have any sort of guideline.
I think it's a rare mix of a genuinely interesting story, a few fantastic performances by the actors, an incredible soundtrack, and some of the best set design in any movie ever. Thank you so much for listening. James, where can people find us on the internet?
You can find us on Twitter at Through Sci-Fi Pod. So that's at Through Sci-Fi Pod. We've got a lovely Twitter account, some lovely stuff on there. So if you want to get in contact, just send us a tweet.
And you can also get in touch with us by email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com.
So next week, we're going to continue our journey through artificial intelligence, and we're going to be looking at the films The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951. What's the other one we're looking at, Matt?
2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968. Next week's theme, The Faceless Machine.
Yeah, so look out for that one.